Peter, these are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. Just be careful who you change into.
I've mentioned this before, but every superhero is like a Rorschach test, because over the course of decades, their survival is entirely based on their capacity to be deconstructed and reconstructed again and again. As times change, as cultural values lean differently and public perceptions favor different things, storytellers often have to reinterpret characters like Spider-Man so they can connect with the public imagination and to say something new about the world they live in. And superhero movies have just gotten old enough for this rhythm to become extremely overt. We've had 3 different Spider-Man cinematic adaptations in less than 2 decades. Therefore, this essay seeks to examine and compare the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film and Spider-Man Homecoming in order to understand how they're shaped by their differing cultural contexts and what themes they still end up sharing regardless. So, you know.
I don't want to fight you, Flash.
I wouldn't want to fight me neither.
It's you who's out, Gobby. Out of your mind.
Both Spider-Man and Spider-Man Homecoming occupy completely different ends when it comes to how healthy the superhero genre was. The early 2000s was a period of rehabilitation because after the critical and financial implosion of Batman and Robin and also smaller films like Steel, film properties like Blade, X-Men 1 and Spider-Man 1 became important public pitches to show the credibility and relevance of the entire genre. As a result, the first Spider-Man film's technique is to downplay its own references to what was contemporary and lean very heavily into a sense of visual and cultural nostalgia. In Wilson Coe's essay, Everything Old is Good Again, Myth and Nostalgia in Spider-Man, he argued it was released by Sony Columbia Pictures in late 2002, yet the scientifically minded Peter's everyday life does not feature then recent technological advances such as iPods, mobile phones and the internet. Rather, audiences are presented with a medley of quaintly retro signifiers. Aunt May's grey-painted, knob-riddled TV is a jet-age curio. In 1980s World Wrestling Federation mainstay Macho Man Randy Savage reprises his glory days as an invincible strongman.
That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
The school bully's new car resembles a late 1960s Corvette, and Peter Parker's hairstyle has much more in common with Ringo Starr's. Therefore, this overtly simple, unspecific, and naive world encouraged audiences to reconcile with the movie with their own pleasantly generic memories of the Spider-Man franchise. In contrast, 2017 was a saturated marketplace. There was a consistency of superhero films grossing over $1 billion, and the dominant cinema media force was the MCU, which was the first shared cinematic universe that was constructed as an intended narrative continuum from its very inception.
You think you're the only superhero in the world?
Therefore, Spider-Man Homecoming had to become a piece of transmedia, as Henry Jenkins defined in Convergence Culture, where the old and new media collide. A transmedia story unfolds across multiple media platforms, with each new text making a distinctive and valuable contribution to the whole. In the ideal form of transmedia storytelling, each medium does what it does best. Spider-Man now has to both complement and contribute to an established culture of intertextuality that the audience are now educated to, while at the same time, the film has to have enough of a strong artistic opinion to justify itself as an independent piece of work, also as a reboot. The film's strategy, in contrast, was to actually play up the contemporary markers, from opening the film with a vlog, to the prevalence of texting, to the suit's own technological capabilities.
I put everything in your suit, including this heater.
And on a presentational level, the film adopted the qualities of a John Hughes movie, so it's more comedic, youthful, and smaller in its scope, scale, and time. This in itself solves 2 problems. First, it's a stylistic shortcut for the audience to accept what's different about the Spider-Man without involving the new properties and branding into the plot itself. This was one of the mistakes in the Mark Webb interpretation. It tried to narratively justify its difference with a new subplot involving Peter Parker's parents, but the storyline couldn't develop without overtaking and compromising everything.
I am your father, Peter.
My father is dead. Who are you?
And second, this new Peter Parker both tonally fits and yet feels unique next to the other Marvel characters, because his sense of humor is consistent to the internal tone of the MCU, but his jokes very much runs on a different set of interests.
I got homework.
I'm gonna pretend you didn't say that.
As a result, both films, despite being live-action Spider-Man adaptations, they have very radically different media identities. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is a nostalgia film because it's deeply shaped by a vertical relationship with culture. It looks back into the past to make its meaning.
All this time with me, you're not Superman, you know.
Whereas Spider-Man Homecoming is more horizontal because it looks at what's around it in order to compose itself.
I just wanted to be like you.
And I wanted you to be better.
Subsequently, they also tell incredibly different stories. Spider-Man 1 is an explicit origin film with the objective to establish the character to those unfamiliar, connect intimately with those that are, and to create a market demand for more. While Spider-Man Homecoming serves as an implicit symbolic origin story because it doesn't retell the direct events that created him, but tells the origins of his independence in order to fit into an established market want. Although, narratively, both films follow Joseph Campbell's monomyth very directly, so let's have fun and break it down. No one else excited? Hello? First act of the hero's journey is called the departure, which is defined by the act of the hero leaving home. In the case of Spider-Man 1, it's framed as Peter Parker leaving his old once and crossing into an adult life purely shaped by his uncle's lessons.
Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
While in Homecoming is the act of leaving the shadow of Tony Stark and forming his own life separately.
Look, forget the flying vulture guy, please.
Why?
Why? Because I said so.
In both cases, the familiar world is characterized by superficial and ostentatious desires, and the identity of Spider-Man represents very much the new frontier where humble ambitions without reward or recognition is the alternative contrasting set of values. The second act is identified as the initiation, where the hero faces a series of trials that forces them to commit to their journey, and in both cases, the films are centered on a doomed romance.
I like you.
This is linked to Campbell's notion of the woman as temptress stage, where the protagonist must discover their own position in life by solving their own personal enigmas. In Spider-Man 1, it's Peter Parker's love for Mary Jane, and in Spider-Man Homecoming, this is Liz Allen. And in both cases, they represent the final connection they have to the old world of needing recognition. Therefore, they symbolize old temptations that were straying him away from his journey. Although their narrative significance is different, Spider-Man 1 frames it as a direct ultimatum where what Peter Parker wants cannot be compatible with what Uncle Ben wants. Whereas in Spider-Man Homecoming, Liz and Tony are technically bundled together on the same side of the choice, because unlike Sam Raimi's interpretation, MCU Spider-Man isn't characterized as being a burden. This is a Peter Parker who has, very simply, a good heart, and Spider-Man isn't an identity owned by the dead, but is a manifestation of his youthful sense of life.
You don't understand how the world works.
Yeah, but I understand that selling weapons to criminals is wrong.
Therefore, for him to let go of his old wants in terms of being with the hottest girl in school and ceasing to mimic the celebrity he idolizes, it means achieving the freedom to develop a more authentic self-identity as opposed to successfully living up to someone else's. This is all anchored in the third act, which is referred to as the return, and in the final stage, Freedom to Live, the hero specifically achieves the ability to live in the moment without the regrets of the past and anticipation of the future. In Spider-Man 1, Peter Parker declines Mary Jane on Norman Osborn's funeral, and he calmly cites the words of his uncle.
With great power comes great responsibility.
While in Homecoming, similarly, Peter Parker declines Tony Stark's Avengers invitation and reaffirms his personal humble destiny as the champion of the ordinary.
Somebody's gotta look out for the little guy, right?
But where Spider-Man 1 closes on a massive orchestral explosion as he swings across the city, Homecoming uses the dramatic build-up as a punchline for a joke.
What the?
They have very different opinions of what Spider-Man is. In Spider-Man 1, Peter Parker is freed from his old wants but is now a prisoner of his own guilt.
This is my gift, my curse.
Whereas the identity of Spider-Man isn't presented as penance but a gift in Homecoming, an act of love from Tony and an act of self-acceptance from Peter Parker. The cliffhanger itself is also designed to galvanize all this optimism, whereas the conclusiveness of Spider-Man's final swing is actually designed to spotlight a feeling of doubt. But despite their sharp differences, both films share remarkably similar thematic details. The primary concept that motivates both stories is a struggle with fathers. Not only both Peter Parkers are trying to strive towards the identity of someone else, but the villains are also both fractured, dysfunctional doubles. Unlike Uncle Ben, Norman Osborn is a divorced workaholic who has replaced his family with his military work.
I haven't always been there for you, have I?
You're busy. You're an important man. I understand.
He even prefers Peter over his own son, Harry, because he's smarter and reminds him more of himself. The Vulture, unlike Tony, has an inverted arc where he starts from a place of family and ends up as a more selfish person.
How could you do this to her?
To her? I'm not doing anything to her, Pete. I'm doing this for her.
And Green Goblin and the Vulture also presents themselves at one point as very explicitly substitute father figures, including scenes where they explicitly propose an alliance with the hero.
I could squash you like a bug right now, but I'm offering you a choice.
So I'm gonna give you one chance. Are you ready?
Although in the climax, where Norman Osborn preys on Peter Parker's personal guilt by presenting himself as the father he can save this time,
I've been like a father to you. Be a son to me now.
the Vulture actually accepts his death, and Peter Parker saves him anyway, which contrastly wins over Tomb's opinion so substantially that he protects Peter Parker's identity in the end, like an actual protective father.
If I knew who he was, he'd already be dead.
And the secondary concept is the theming of technology and how it grants power. Green Goblin and Vulture are both motivated by the desire to make the most profit out of selling technology, and both heroes and villains are very much shaped by scientific and technological origins, although Spider-Man 1 presents it as an internal process. Peter and Norman are people that are altered from within. Their costumes and public identities are manifestations of their personalities, whereas in Spider-Man Homecoming, it's an external relationship where the costumes themselves changed who they are inside, to the extent that Peter Parker losing the Stark suit is the central impetus for his personal growth. As a result, these two overarching themes of fathers and technology contributes in building the same message that power is a seductive force that tempts us with glamorous wants, either a nice car to impress a girl, attention from a celebrity, or simply money and vengeance, but all of these are merely substitutions for true self-acceptance, and that comes in the form of pursuing more selfless and humble ideals. But because one of these is a nostalgia film and the other is a piece of transmedia, its consistency to its format meant in one story this lesson is something that is inherited.
I have a father. His name was Ben Parker.
And in the other is something discovered against competing factors.
Last chance, yes or no?
No.
Okay.
Sam Raimi looks at Spider-Man as a legacy of death, whereas the MCU views him as the ultimate symbol of life. But nobody wants to hear that. Everybody wants to hear my opinion, in which live-action Spider-Man is my favorite. Well, it's Turkish Spider-Man, of course.
Thank you.